Okay, this video is about male-female differences. And here's a picture of me when I was in college. Here's a picture of a beautiful young lady. And the differences are rather obvious. The male is much more muscular in the shoulders, the upper body. He's sort of narrow in the hips. She's got bigger hips for being able to deliver a baby. She's got small shoulders. Typical female is about as strong as a boy in 6th grade, maybe 7th grade at the most. Once he reaches puberty, his testosterone goes up about tenfold, and the boy becomes much stronger than a girl. So women can't do much physically in terms of upper body strength, and they don't like anything where there's upper body strength, physical competition in general, because they're going to lose at that, okay? They're real good at talking, so they like talking, okay? The male has more physical strength, so he can go, farther away from home base to forage, to defend the group when they have to fight with an outside group. He's more able to hunt bigger animals and, again, forage a field. So that's things characteristic of men. It wouldn't make sense for a woman to have big bulky shoulders because she only needs enough strength to control her sons until they hit puberty. Then they go off with the men and do things that men do. Adolescence is a much smaller thing in a primitive like hunter-gatherer society than it is in the modern world where there's all this high school and college type stuff. Okay, the fact that she's got a narrow waist indicates that she's not pregnant. So it's a signal to him that it's worth his time to mate with her because she'll probably be able to generate a baby. Men in general, they're hesitant to approach a woman in a romantic way because, she might have a boyfriend, a husband, or brother that's going to kick his butt. So he's not going to waste his time if she's got a big belly. Because a big belly in the past, it meant that she was pregnant, therefore he couldn't have a baby with her, or she was a grandma. So that's why I think men have very little attraction to fat women. It just is like turns their brain off that she can't have a baby with them. Okay. She's got a big butt, big hips because she carries omega-3 fats there. It's an energy efficient area for carrying those omega-3 fats. Okay. She's got breasts, that's what a man has. A man has a Johnson, down here is package. A woman has breasts and she's got a Virginia. Okay, her breasts, are also a signal once they're developed. They're small before she's pre-pubertal, so it's a sign she can't have babies. They're bigger once she has reached puberty, and it's a signal to the man that she's fertile. Okay. So also when her breasts are bigger and they're a little bit close together, it's almost like she's got a butt on her chest, her cleavage, and that is sexually attractive, okay? Her lips are a little full when she's in her premenopausal, fertile reproductive phase of life. But she's got a narrow window of fertility. Her fertility starts to diminish, by the time she's 30 or so and keeps going down and down, whereas he can have babies from the beginning of puberty up until his death, okay? He can have them all through. In the Western world, men have a high incidence of becoming impotent because the high-fat diets plug up their arteries. More than 50% of men are impotent in their 50s because of the Western diet, okay? But where they don't eat a Western diet, they eat low-fat, plant-based diets without oils, the men keep their fertility much longer. The Johnson keeps working, okay? We're going to talk a little bit also about the brain of men versus women. Okay. Couple things. The premenopausal woman has a much bigger pituitary. Here's the pituitary gland in a man, and it is pretty much like the central crossroads of the brain. Is the hypothalamus is this area right in here, the floor of the third ventricle. So here's the lateral ventricles, here's the third ventricle, and then the floor of the third ventricle and the side walls are called the hypothalamus. They connect to the pituitary. The male pituitary is quite small. It's kind of small, has a flat top. That's a key thing. By the way, one of the things I do is I work as a neuroradiologist, so I look at brains all the time, and I can tell you the number one thing, the obvious difference between a premenopausal female and a man is that the woman has a big pituitary. Typically, the woman's pituitary is convex upward, so the top margin projects upward. Usually it's even a little bigger than this. And this would be like a typical difference in a male-female pituitary of a similar age. Let's say they were both 30 years of age. Female pituitary would often be a little bigger than this, gets even bigger during pregnancy, whereas the male pituitary is kind of small. Okay, and that's because a female has a menstrual cycle. That's because females can have babies. Okay, but that's also part of why females are more emotional and their personality can vary during the month. Okay, and she can have that time of the month where she's kind of a grouch for no reason, PMS, etc. So that's the only big distinction. You'll hear different articles saying, well, I heard the parietal lobe's bigger or smaller in this group, or the corpus callosum's bigger or smaller in this group, or some other minor difference. But I can tell you from looking at a lot of brains, the only obvious thing when you look at a brain is a big pituitary in a female. All the other stuff, too, once you look at it more closely, you'll hear this study showed this, but it's contradicted by this study. So the big pituitary, that's what stands out. That's a major thing that is for real. Okay, in terms of IQ testing, in general, men used to have an average IQ of about 5 points higher than women, but I doubt that's true anymore because men have so much more childhood, sort of brain damage diseases like autism, attention deficit, dyslexia, all of that stuff, which lowers their academic and cognitive performance. Nowadays, there's more and more females in college and graduate school than there used to be, partly because women are encouraged to pursue more and more education. I think one of the goals of that is to prevent the high IQ women from having babies. The longer a woman stays in school, the fewer children she has, or even she'll not have any children. I know lots of female doctors, they never had any children. And I believe that there is a powerful movement to try to get the more intelligent women to not have babies. And that's part of this whole cultural thing about saying, housewives are losers, homemakers are losers, you can have a career, etc. But when they get older, typically a woman will realize, her family is a million times more important than her so-called career. But anyways, that's one thing too. It's also the case that more geniuses are men. And part of being a genius is sort of sacrificing much of your social life. A woman is less likely to be willing to sacrifice her social life. Jordan Peterson has talked about this, like in law firms. He worked with a lot of lawyers. A male lawyer, 35 years of age, he doesn't give a rat's ass. He'll work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. He wants to rise in the firm, become rich, be high status. Okay, whereas a woman's going to say, it isn't worth it. I want to have a child. I don't want to work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. I'm going to cut back on my hours. Okay, it's just, for her, it doesn't make as much sense. Okay, men, we talked about the big shoulders. Men are, in general, on average, taller, heavier, stronger, faster, have more body hair. Woman tends to have more fat, more estrogen hormone. Estrogen hormone is a fat storage hormone. It tells her body to store some fat. The baby might need that for energy because historically, biologically, the woman's body is designed to be able to get pregnant and to carry a baby for 9 months and to have a baby, then to nurse the baby, and then to raise the baby and supervise the baby. Typically, let's say before women could control the reproduction in the modern world with birth control pills and contraception, she would be having 10 or more kids. It'd be routine for her to have 15 kids. Okay, on average, she would nurse her kids like about 3 years. So, that was typical in the Victorian age in England for a woman to have 10 babies and to nurse them, for average of 3 years, 2 to 4 years. Okay. Other things about men. Men have a deeper voice. They're stronger to hunt and to fight. They're the warriors, so to speak. A lady named Joyce Benenson wrote a book called Worriers and Warriors. It's a pretty good book. So she says men are warriors. They're willing to go fight. Men are more altruistic than women. Okay, women care about themselves and their family and their kids. They care about their kids a lot more than their husband. Okay, women don't care as much as men do about their group in general. Okay, a guy is willing to go fight, risk his life and die, as Joyce Benenson says, even for other men who he doesn't like or doesn't really know or care about that much, as long as they're part of his group, whatever that group might be. Whereas she said for a female, it doesn't make sense for her to risk her life because typically a woman's been popping out babies ever since she hit puberty. And if she, let's say she's around 20 years of age, if she dies, then probably all of her babies will die, okay? And she won't be able to have any babies in the future. So it'll be a loss for their entire group in terms of ability to produce babies. Whereas if a man dies, some other man can impregnate the females that he would have impregnated. So the group does not lose its reproductive capacity. Okay? So from an evolutionary biology point of view of risk of extinction, men are much more expendable. And that's, sad to say, but it is true. Okay? And female, like I said, she's smaller body weight, so you don't have to have as much food to feed her. And, it would be a waste of size to make her bigger when the risk for our ancestors typically was starvation. Okay. Again, like I said, her big butt and thighs are to carry omega-3 fats for the baby. It's energetically efficient to carry it down there by the hips. Why do women live longer? Well, for a couple of reasons. One of them is that they have better immune system to fight infections, but that comes at a price. They also get about 80% of autoimmune diseases. Another reason in the Western world is because a female menstruates. When she menstruates, she loses red blood cells, and that lowers her blood hematocrit, meaning the percentage of blood that is due to red blood cells. Most blood cells are red blood cells, over 99%. So what I'm saying is by having a lower hematocrit, a lower percent of cells in the blood, that makes her blood thinner, more like water. This thinner, lower viscosity blood lowers her blood pressure. And remember, blood pressure is the most common cause of atherosclerosis because it damages arterial walls. So what I'm basically saying here is because she menstruates and has thus lower hematocrits, less RBCs, red blood cells in the blood, she gets less hypertension and therefore she gets less atherosclerosis and therefore she lives longer. Okay. The other joke is, why do women live longer? Because they're not married to women. Okay, so that's the joke psychologically. It's also part of the reason, depending on how you calculate lifespan, men take a lot more risk. As we said, men are willing to go fight in a very altruistic way and risk their life. Men also take more risks when they're seeking status. I can remember when I was young, it was guys who wanted to be like Evel Knievel and they would ride their bicycles off of jump ramps. They would speed in their cars. They would do all kinds of things, take risks that women would not do. They'd sometimes challenge other men to fights. They would do things that are relatively a little bit crazy. Okay, as far as personality, a female has intrinsic value in a social setting just because she's a female. Okay, because she's a female and her body can make a baby and carry a baby, she's got value to the group because of fertility. Okay, she also has value to the group because of her beauty. And men want sex a lot more than women. Don't let anybody tell you that it's any different. The old joke was that a woman might say, oh, I really like sex after a nice dinner and a nice movie with a guy I really like. I really enjoy it. Okay, whereas guys will tell me stuff like, I like her, I would bang her on the bathroom floor while my friend was taking a dump. And I know that's vulgar, but that also is a pretty good difference in how men and women talk about sex. Men love sex. Men will take tremendous risks and do crazy things in order to obtain sex from a woman that they are attracted to. For women, sex is much more risky. They're the one that carry that baby for 9 months. They're the one that's going to have to raise that baby. So they're more careful than they used to be. They're more careful than men about sleeping. But women nowadays are much more promiscuous than they used to be, and that's because they've got control of their reproduction with birth control pills, condoms, and, getting rid of the pregnancy in what ways. Okay, let's see. Men do not have intrinsic value in comparison with women. Men have to work very hard to build status in their group, whatever it might be, to rise in the male hierarchy. And if a male does not do that, he will not be able to attract a female or have kids. Women want a man who's higher status than themselves, at least equal, preferably higher status. And women have a tendency towards what is called hypergamy or hypergamy. She wants to date and marry up. She wants a guy who's more successful than her, better looking than her, all kinds of things. Whereas men have what is called hypogamy. They'll often date and marry down. The man will often trade wealth, status, experience for her youth, beauty, and fertility. That is a very common thing, whereas a female won't do that. Okay? And that's also why sometimes a high status female with lots of education, like these female doctors, and I know a bunch of them, and some of them are quite cute too, they never got married. They don't even have a boyfriend. They don't have any children. Okay, they're going to end up lonely old cat lady spinsters. And partly it's because it's hard for them to accept marrying a man of lower status, but the men of equal or higher status have already got a woman and don't want them. Okay, whereas female often pursue hypergamy, and that's partly why the modern divorce system, which rewards them for divorcing, enables a woman to behave very badly and constantly keep on trying to marry up and basically use her sexual attractiveness as a lottery ticket. But they often end up paying a high price when they do that. Quite often what I have seen is it's very damaging to their children. So they might have financially benefited, but they've left a wake of disaster in their path, especially their children. Their children often really do much worse than is expected when women behave that way. Men have more attention deficit disorder, more dyslexia, more autism spectrum disorder, more antisocial personality disorder. They're more likely to be criminals, more likely to be alcoholics, IV drug addicts, all of that stuff. They sort of given up on themselves. Female are more likely to have episodes of depression, clinical depression. They're more afraid of things in general. They're worriers. Like I said, it doesn't make sense for a female to risk her life, so they're less risk takers. Male personality in general is more aloof, more detached. Men like things like machines better than women do. They love working on a car engine, working on a computer, taking it apart, putting it together. Some people say men live for things, women live for people. A decent man is usually going to be honest, and he pretty much has to be, because men do things with other men. They play sports, they hunt, they fight, and a guy has to be honest and competent and do his job. Otherwise, the other men will ostracize him or beat the shit out of him. So he has to play ball with those are the rules. Whereas the woman, she can get away with a lot more lying and sneakiness than a man can. Because if a man's a liar, then he's kind of worthless to the other men if he's unreliable. And don't get me wrong, some men, they are big-time liars in a certain context. And I've met some male doctors who are total liars and scumbags. But in general, I can tell you in my entire life, for example, my father never once lied to me. I've never lied to my kids. I've never felt a reason to. Okay? My mother, she would never tell a bad lie, but she would often stretch the truth a little bit when it was convenient for her on stupid little things. Like she said, I'll give you a ride to your friend's house at 3 o'clock. And then 3 o'clock comes around, she's like, oh no, I have to go somewhere. And I'm like, Ma, you promised me a ride to my friend's house. She's like, bad promise is better not kept. I'm like, what kind of a BS answer is that? And sometimes something came up and she's busy, but all I'm saying is, and I've seen women say things like my wife. She came from a communist country in her childhood, and she said, in a communist country, you have to lie all day long to survive. It's normal. And I'm like, it's not normal. Like, that's not normal. That's not acceptable. That's not good. Other things I've seen much more, like I said, because the man has to get status or he's not going to get laid, he's never going to be able to reproduce or attract a woman, men tend to be much more intense about competitiveness. A lot of women are pretty smart and can do very well in school. Like I said, I've known 3 females. One of them was my girlfriend, who were all second in their medical school class. But none of them had any ambition that I could see other than to get a nice job, be competent at their job, and make money. Whereas men, I've seen intense motivation. They want to be the most published author in their field. I always wanted to be a great doctor, and there's something driving me inside, pushing and pushing and pushing that I really couldn't control. It just wanted to achieve. Females in general, our ancestors hung out at home base, foraging locally, caring for the kids, and they have to get along with the other females. In general, females get along with other females to have allies, and they need other females to support them if a male is sexually harassing them. 1 or 2 females can't fight off a man, but you get 5 or 6 of them, they can fight off a man who would be harassing their girlfriend. Okay. Also, if their man goes out hunting and he dies while hunting or fighting or something like that, they need the other women to feed them, because they're too busy with all their babies until their man arrives back, or they get a new man. Okay, so women will tend to form allegiances in that sense. Men will form allegiance with their buddies who they hunt together with, they fight together with, or whatever, but they're not as immediate. Like if you criticize one woman, you get all these women supporting her. Okay, even if she doesn't deserve it at all. like some recently divorced female whose name I'm not going to specifically mention here. Whereas men, they don't really care. They're more, like I said, detached, aloof, not going to get involved. Okay, so anyways, that's all I've got for male-female differences today. Hope that was interesting and useful.